Hello everyone. It's 1 o'clock here on the East Coast of the U.S., so let's get started. Thank you for participating in the Strategic Solutions for Smart Grid webinar. This is the second in a series of 3 such events that are aimed at providing a clear picture of the status and future of Smart Grid. My name is Nick Manley and I'm with Clasma Events, your host for today's webinar. Our goal here today is to have a lively and interactive discussion around the innovation strategies for advancing the smart grid. We will have a brief presentation by each of our panelists and will be followed by a Q&A session. So be sure to post your questions using the questions function of your webinar control panel. You can also tweet your questions using the GridWeek hashtag. Your participation is key. Your moderator for today's event is Antonio Budiarjo, President and CEO of Clasma Events. So without further ado, Anto.
Thank you, Nick, and welcome everybody. Good afternoon or good morning or good evening, wherever you are. It's good to have you here on this webinar on this week of the 4th of July, which is a holiday time for many people, so appreciate your time. We can get the next slide, Nick. So I just want to speak a little bit about why we're doing this webinar and explain the objectives of this brief gathering. So we have been, at Clasma, we've been organizing Grid Week now for, this is the 5th year since 2007. And the objective has always been of Grid Week to bring together the broadest range of stakeholders involved in smart grid, to have a discussion and more importantly to further the agenda of smart grid. And we do this very much in a collaborative fashion. It's been a key design criteria of the event from day one. Since December of last year, a group of the advisory board made up of partner organizations such as those represented here, UTC, NIST, GridWise Architecture Council, as well as DOE, EEI, NRECA, and many others that you see on the website. We have been meeting to discuss what we need to cover at Grid Week this year. And we've come up with initial thoughts of a theme of structure. The theme of the whole event is the way forward. The advisory board feels that smart grid is getting to that point where deployment is happening, and we need to take maybe a step back and sort of understand what is the sort of next steps for smart grid. So in extension to that process is we then involve the broader organizing committee made up of sponsors and media partners, analyst partners, and many other organizations to actually further discuss this, again, in a very collaborative manner. And in the process of doing this, in the last few months, we thought that it would be good to have these interactive webinars to really present to the broader smart grid community what the thinking was in terms of what the subjects we think needs to be covered, and to get input from you, from the people who are involved day to day in smart grid. So this is the concept of this webinar. We do, as Nick mentioned, want to make this a very interactive session today. So please do put your questions or comments either in the GoToMeeting question box, or tweet, or email, or otherwise tell us what's on your mind, suggestions as to how to make this really the best discussion forum in 2 months in September. So that's the objective of this webinar, to make it really very interactive so that we address real issues. So the agenda for Grid Week has been structured to have 3 broad topics that are dealt with in the 3 core days of Grid Week. So on Tuesday, which is the subject of the previous webinar 3 or 4 weeks ago, the theme is looking forward, trying to draw the picture of what electricity and energy consumption is going to look like in 10, 20 years from now. The second day, Wednesday, we really want to talk about strategic solutions, which is the subject of this webinar. And then on Thursday of Grid Week, we'll be talking about states of deployment to try and to take a stock take and a status report as to how deployment of smart grid is going. So the focus of today is strategic solutions, and we have three panelists on this webinar, each of them representing each of the three streams of discussions that will happen on the Wednesday of Grid Week. So I will introduce the first individual panelist today, which is Mike Oldak. Mike is with the Utility Telecom Council. And Mike, do you want to take it over and tell us what your focus is?
Thanks, Anto. We've sort of been given each a few minutes just to sort of give an overview. My track is on communication infrastructure. When people say, what is the smart grid, I always talk about the millions, maybe even billions of smart devices and sensors that are going to be out there. And then the communication infrastructure that's going to link all these devices back to utilities and third parties and consumers and provide utilities with options in managing the grid in ways that they've never been able to do in the past. And so really the communication infrastructure is a huge component. So we've broken down the infrastructure into three component pieces. One is consumer connectivity, field device connectivity, and the role of the internet. And I think this is interesting because when we're looking at rolling out the smart grid and especially implementing all the applications for utilities, for consumers, having this in place in a way that's plug and play and really doable and useful will be really important to engage consumers. I think we found that so much of the value of the smart grid is for the first time having utilities engaging consumers and having them help us help them and really provide value in terms not only of lowering today's rates, but what we've been, I think, starting to call less more, that electric rates are going up, the cost of new generation is going through the roof, all of these other clean air requirements and everything. And to the extent that we can use our existing resources more efficiently, we'll have less of that more electric rates. So we've sort of broken down the first group into consumer connectivity. How smart will the devices be? When we talk about these smart devices, will it be one way? Will we be telling a water heater just to turn off, electric water heater? Or will the devices like air conditioners be sending back information saying, check your filters, you're clogged and you're costing yourself too much money? How do we show consumers the real benefits? That when they want to put in a home energy management system, what we've seen is in cases where it's a flat rate, trying to make a business out of that is difficult. And so we really need the communication infrastructure that really links turbines down to toasters. Can we keep the information private and secure? Can we maximize the use of all these devices? We see a lot of people wanting to get into this sphere, but really have they connected to all parts of the industry, the wholesale market, the utility distribution system, so that all these investments have the maximum benefits. When we talk about field connectivity, we've seen debates in the past on who can do it, whether utilities should be building their own networks, whether we can rely on commercial carriers. And what we've been looking at is, for each component within a utility, there are different technical and reliability requirements and cost benefits. What do utilities consider in choosing among these various communication options? And I think third is the ubiquitous role of the internet. When does the internet make sense for utility smart grid and other applications? Will the cloud be able to meet utility requirements for all the requirements, for mission critical, for running, controlling smart thermostats? What's the role? How much can utilities and customers trust it? Where will it be efficient? What are the real benefits that we can use the internet for in really achieving the goals of the smart grid? So that's sort of a real fast overview of the communication infrastructure track.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. And so again, this is about the strategic solution. So what are the pieces required to implement smart grid? So obviously, communications infrastructure is, as it were, the foundation of smart grid, smart devices, and everything else. And on top of that is really the information. What do we do with the information? The information management. So one of the second major area that we're going to be covering on the Wednesday of Grid Week is information management, and the person that's managing that side of the agenda is Eric Gunter. Eric is the chair of the GridWise Architecture Council. I think many of you know Eric Gunter from many different roles that he's played. So over to you, Eric, and explain to us what the thinking has been with by the board and yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Anto. Let me go on to the next slide there. Basically, what we're looking at here is once we have all those devices out in the field, once we have the communications necessary to manage those devices, capture information from those devices, we're able to begin implementing this collection of applications that together, collectively, create what we call a modern grid, the smart grid. So these emerging applications, they produce, they consume, they manipulate large amounts of data using that infrastructure that Mike introduced us to create information that is a strategic asset and has concrete business value. We're not putting these systems out there to create data for no reason. And data by itself is not very useful. We've got to find a way to take that data and turn it into information that can, in fact, become that strategic asset and can have that concrete business value. So the number of devices, systems, and applications that we're seeing come about in smart grid applications is increasing at an exponential rate. And I don't just shoot from the hip on that particular statement. The work that we've been doing with EPRI, many of you may have seen a slide or two that EPRI has produced that shows some quantitative results of some analysis that's been done showing just how many data sources have been how they've been increasing over the past few years, and looking at real data, real deployments that people are planning on, how rapidly that's increasing. So it's a real opportunity, but a real problem. So in the overall area of information management, I like to think of it in terms of three key components. The first one, which is one of my favorites and the favorite of the GridWise Architecture Council, is the architecture, the arrangement of the systems, devices, and elements that are necessary to allow us to turn that data into a strategic information asset. And a lot of aspects of the architecture in our industry have not really been fully fleshed out yet. So as we go and move beyond a lot of pontificating about all the things we could do and move towards actual strategic deployment of these technologies, we've got to pay attention to the overarching plan, how things are organized, aka the architecture. So what we hope to accomplish at Grid Week this year is to capture enough information that we can relate on some of the early lessons learned and things that we need further to address, the tools and concepts that we need to apply in order to create an architecture. Those by the GridWise Architecture Council, but also the SGIP Architecture Committee and other sources, that will allow us to effectively implement these applications and integrate them in an interoperable fashion. So that takes me to the second piece there. That's the systems integration aspect. Once you've got the overarching plan, the architecture, that puts the framework in place that can allow us to do cost-effective integration. With well-defined interfaces, well-defined points of interoperability, we can apply the necessary standards, procure and develop the necessary software to link these applications together to make the whole much more valuable than the individual parts. As we do that and we start to get these applications to function, then we're in that mode of producing, consuming, and manipulating large amounts of data. And this is the stage in which we turn that data into information. And we have to make it accessible to the other systems, individuals, both within utility organizations and without, that can use it. So the access to that information, the ability to quickly get what you need or transparently provide what devices and other systems are doing for you and end consumers transparently in the background. So a lot of work needs to be done there. So what we're hoping to do here at Grid Week this year is to further explore these areas in some depth, enter into some really good conversations on that so we can move forward towards really realizing the overall strategic benefits that these smart grid applications have for us. Anto, back to you.
Thank you, Eric. We're starting to get a couple of questions in, which is great. One of the questions is about the availability of the slides that we're using here for the webinar. We will make a slide, and actually more importantly, we'll be making a video of this webinar available on the GridWeek website probably by tomorrow time. Thank you, Eric, and that's clearly, those are kind of the pieces, the communication infrastructure and then the information. But a discussion about strategic solutions, about how we're going to talk about the pieces that's required to make the smart grid a reality, really can't happen until you have a conversation about how the industry, utilities, and other entities are going to adopt this and what the challenges are in adopting these sort of key technologies. So the next big area that we want to talk about is on key technology adoption, and for that we have Dean Prohaska from NIST, and as I think most of you know, that NIST is very involved in the standards side of things, but in this context, Dean will talk about the adoption of the technologies, which is critically important. So, Dean, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Dean Prohaska, and I'm the National Coordinator for Smart Grid Conformance at the National Institute of Standards and Technology at the Department of Commerce. I'm responsible for coordinating the Grid Week 2011 track on key technology adoptions, as Anto just indicated. So we've heard the two previous speakers discuss information management and communication aspects needed to support the smart grid. Now, I'll be discussing the issues and opportunities surrounding the adoption of these and other smart grid technologies. I don't see the smart grid as a build it and they will come scenario. We're not out here building a baseball field in the middle of Iowa somewhere in the cornfields. So I see, developing the business case is really crucial to justify the investment. So this is really going to be critical. So the track that I'm coordinating will be discussing this in particular. And, we also need to manage and make sure that we manage the impact of these new technologies that are being adopted on current infrastructure. So this makes it a little bit more of a difficult scenario. In addition, regulators and policymakers also have an important role with advancing the technology adoption through regulation, policy, as well as incentives. And finally, what we'll be addressing in our panel, in the panels, will be the consumers need to understand how the smart grid can benefit them. And once they also then need to be empowered to take advantage of what that technology can offer them, since they may be bearing some of the cost, as well as definitely playing a crucial role in the acceptance of some of the aspects of the smart grid. So I look forward to the discussion and discussion portion of this session, and I'll be addressing any questions and look forward to your input as well. Your input is really critical to the success of our Grid Week 2011 conference.
Thank you, Dean. So had a question from Barbara London about if, again, the purpose of this webinar. Are we going to talk about concrete sort of material? Again, as we described at the beginning, the purpose of this webinar is to convey, to share with the smart grid community what the thinking is about the subjects that we're going to cover at GridWeek, and an opportunity to learn from the community what we're missing, or are we going down the right path. So really the key purpose of this webinar is to understand what we need to cover that maybe we have not covered. So that's hopefully that answers the question. There is a question from Judith Schwartz. Nick, if you can put that up on the screen. And Judith says, could we include a discussion of information architecture as well? That's more than taxonomy, data hierarchies, and data demarcation, information structures. So maybe that's an Eric question.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, and I like the way you put it about information architecture. We've been spending a lot of time talking about the architecture of the field networks and the like. We talk a little bit about some of the architecture for inter-application exchange, but when you get into taxonomies, data hierarchies, now we're starting to look at some technologies that have been evolving relatively recently to manage this huge amount of data. And one of the things I'm hoping that we can address during GridWeek, and let you start thinking about it now, is the role of semantic management technologies, things like the semantic web and other tools that are becoming available, tools from folks like Top Quadrant and the like, that allow us to manage all of the information models based on many different standards, all of the information, the actual instance data that's associated with that, so we can start to get a handle on all that data, what the definitions of that data are, the types of data, what it means, and the like. Just getting that organized is a sort of a step between overall architecture and the integration in order to make sure that we end up with applications that are useful, extensible, and create a framework for the yet undiscovered killer apps.
Anybody else want to add to that, Mike, on the information architecture?
I think in the information architecture, I think that will be part of a key to make sure that the data, that the information that's being conveyed across the grid, all the way from the turbines to toasters, meets all the requirements. And I think that, looking at the standards and looking at what people are doing, I think they all pretty much have that in mind.
Okay, thanks. We have another question from.
Can I jump in there? I think that was a great question, and I also think as we look and develop this architecture, we also need to take into account to make this as global as possible. I think this is something that is certainly a strong point with me, where we can work with other international communities where possible to develop a more common architecture as well. I think that would behoove all of us to do that. We have tons of multinational vendors, and we're basing a lot of our work off of international standards as well. So.
Yeah, and Judith just posted another comment back saying information architecture is not only important for its own sake, but important for consumer education as well, so we don't overwhelm people with too much information. I think that's another great perspective of that, is that with the vast amount of information that Eric mentioned, structuring it in a way that makes sense to consumer in an education process is key. So let us move forward. So there is a question from Ashu Vigni. I think I got that right. I apologize if I didn't. So the question is there a suite of industry standards for smart grid communication infrastructure? There are quite a few, obviously, on the M2M and Internet side. And maybe that speaks to much of the activity that's going on right now to rationalize that. And maybe, Dean, you can help put the context of what NIST is doing to that. And more so, how are we covering that at GridWeek?
Well, I think that, there is some activity going on in that in the Smart Grid Interoperability Panel in terms of some of the priority action plans, and maybe, Eric, you can jump in on that as well. But certainly one of the big drivers are looking at the IP suite of protocols. And where possible, we're trying to make a lot of this as technology agnostic as practical. Now, having said that, I know that there is work going on right now, I believe at the ITU as well as TIA, just to name a couple of organizations. And I think in the TIA in particular, they're looking at a lot of this machine-to-machine activity. I haven't seen a lot of that at that level of protocols being discussed. But Eric, you might want to comment on that as well.
Sure. Well, we've got a lot of standards, that are already there. The NIST, original phase 1 of the NIST activity leading up to the SGIP identified a lot of gaps, and then the priority action plans that we are working on in the SGIP are working to fill those gaps. But the fact that we talk about gaps implies that there are non-gaps, that there are, there's material that we already have. And in fact, in the NIST roadmap published in January of 2010, around 70 standards, some very important core standards, and then a number of others were identified that are directly applicable in this overall infrastructure. And of those, quite a few of them are related to this pure communications piece. You couple that with the IEEE has identified well over 100 existing standards that have been there for some time related to smart grid, many of which are communications related. And industry groups such as the OpenSG group under the UCA International Users Group are producing actionable guidelines on how you map your requirements and attributes to these standards. They've gone and done a very good job at taking all those standards I was referring to, or a large percentage of them, and identifying core attributes that you can map to the requirements. So there's a lot of material out there. It's a bit of a fire hose, but there is a starting point.
And obviously, the interesting thing about smart grid is that it touches a lot of things. If you take the scope from, as Mike mentioned earlier, from generation to toaster, that and all of the other sort of devices and electricity consuming devices in our world, it touches pretty much every manufactured device that exists, from large devices to small. So, and many of those industries have existing standards. And I think one of the challenges for the smart grid community is how to make all of those existing standards interoperate with each other and not try and create new standards for everything, which will be a non-starter. So again, I think that's part of having this particular discussion about communication infrastructure and information management as part of GridWeek and the strategic solution.
But I think it's important, too, as I look at the question again, and Eric mentioned this earlier, we need to really focus kind of on those interface points. We're not going to be demanding that everyone use, the exact same standard in some cases, right?
Right.
So we need these standards to interoperate. So we need to focus on those interface points to help achieve that.
So is there another question that's come in from Stephen Castle, and he says, if you can put that up, Nick, the panelists believe utilities will install energy monitoring management systems beyond the smart meter. How do we think it's going to play out? So this goes, I think this is a nice follow-on to the previous question. Clearly, utilities are a key part of the evolution of smart grid. A lot of the thinking, a lot of the development of the agenda for GridWeek is very much with utility sort of perspective and challenges in mind. Do you want to handle that first, Mike?
Yeah. For those of you following the smart grid, if we had talked about a device that we're working on that probably causes cancer, will lead to car accidents, will possibly tell people where you are and who you're talking to and who you're texting and all this other information about you, and called it a cell phone. People want their cell phone. But we've sort of rolled out the smart grid, and I'm not sure we really explained to customers the real value that they're getting out of this. So the question is, will utilities install energy monitoring and energy management systems beyond the smart meter? Like anything else in the smart grid and the value of the smart grid to a particular utility and its consumers depends on that utility. How much reserve margins it has, what its cost is for meter reading, a lot of these other things. And so the value of installing home energy management devices depends on what the value is to utility consumers and to the utilities themselves. When you look at some of the studies that have been done on the value of the smart grid, a lot of them are dependent on dynamic pricing and the ability for customers to set their smart appliances to respond to critical peak pricing signals, either with peak time rebates or critical peak pricing. And we've seen the value to utilities is the ability to cut critical peaks by 30–40%. And that means avoiding new generation, avoiding new infrastructure. So I think getting customers on board is going to be vital. Now also, when you're talking about someone buying a home energy management device, what's the value to a consumer? For those states where there's a flat electric rate, moving something off peak or making sure that your air conditioner and your water heater don't go on at the same time has probably zero value against a flat rate. But it has huge value to the utility. The ability to have load leveling at the home level, where you've got 3 people at a cul-de-sac that each go out and buy an electric vehicle and have these high current chargers installed, the ability to have some kind of management system that could avoid the transformer upgrades and the cost to utilities. Those are costs that customers will avoid in the future, and it could be that utilities will give them benefits. So I think what our first panel is going to look at on consumer connectivity is these kinds of home energy management systems. What are the issues that we're running into in terms of the communication between the utility and these devices, where the value is, what does it mean with respect to privacy? When you're talking about just a smart meter and sending back the data from the meter to the utility, that's all NSA encrypted, and it's hourly amount. When you're talking about sending data to a home energy management device, you could be talking about what the privacy community is concerned about, and that is the real-time data flow showing exactly what appliances are on or what you're doing or how many people are home or not home. So I think those are the privacy issues that we're going to discuss.
Thank you, Mike. One of the things in terms of what utilities are thinking in these areas, one of the things that's very encouraging in terms of our development process of the agenda is that we have a large number of utilities involved through the organizations such as EEI, but also in actual discussing with speakers that we're putting into place for various sessions. Many of the utilities are making plans, and many of the utilities will be speakers at GridWeek that will actually be sharing some of those plans. So I think we're covering a lot of that. So I'm glad that question came up. And Steve?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I think that's a fantastic question because, again, I think people continue to think of smart grid as equaling smart meter. And I hear what you're saying, Mike, about a lot of the pricing, but there are so many other, people installing, utilities installing sensors today, whether it's fault sensors or phasor measurement units, where they can, adjust quality of power, reducing power losses on distribution lines. There's tons of savings for utilities there. This isn't just about the smart meter.
So there's an interesting, I'm not sure it's a question, there's a comment that kind of speaks to this from Gordon Chen. If you can put that up, Mike. Nick, sorry. He said, I thought smart grid is about intelligent and automatic management of electricity over transmission and distribution. How does the consumer sector become a key issue for this webinar? And I think I'd like to extend that. How does it become a key issue, not just for this webinar, but for Grid Week and for a lot of conversations within the smart grid community? So,
I think it's a good question. How does the consumer sector become a key issue of this webinar? What we've seen from the pilots out there is sort of like the theory of large numbers. We've seen in the pilots that on the hottest days of the year, where we're reaching the critical peaks of our systems, and the utilities are running their least efficient generators and buying from extremely high wholesale markets, that by having lots of residential customers move their thermostats 1 or 2 degrees, they've been able to cut demand by 30 or 40%. That not only saves huge amounts of money because the price of those wholesale markets and running inefficient generation is much more expensive than the average, but it allows the utilities to avoid or at least defer huge investments in new generation, transmission, T&D upgrades, all of these things. So, for the first time, utilities are going to be enlisting the help of consumers to help optimize the use of existing resources. When you're talking about even, California's million solar roofs, you've got 1 million solar roofs, and this cloud comes by, not one of those Microsoft clouds, but a real one. Does the utility keep spinning reserves, or does it start turning off water heaters in the same substation? And that way you've got the customer really participating and really become a major part of optimizing and getting the most benefit out of smart grid.
So, Eric, you're very much a T&D kind of perspective. How do you respond to this? Why is there so much effort and so much focus on consumer issues?
Well, at the end of the day, the end consumer pays the bills. They're, they end up paying for through their rates all the improvements that have to be made to support the whole range of smart grid applications. The invisible stuff, if you will, it's on the T&D side, has to be supported by that, as well as the things that are more visible. So I think there necessarily is a lot of interest on the consumer side, because they need to see what's in it for them, very clearly. And that direct interaction of what can be done with information to minimize their energy costs is probably the best way to do that. Also, the multipliers we're talking about, the amount of money, the billions that are being spent on smart metering, necessarily makes that a focus. But clearly, it's only a piece, but it's a very important piece. What I'm hoping we are able to successfully do at Grid Week is to cover the landscape of applications. And in the section that I was talking about, the importance of architecture, the importance of integration, the importance of information and data management and access is applicable to the whole spectrum.
I think, one of the things when we talk about the role, Gordon, when you're talking about how does the consumer sector become an issue, I think, a lot of that's going to rely on time of use pricing, dynamic pricing to really drive that. I think without dynamic pricing, it's going to be a little bit tougher to see some of those benefits. And I just wanted to point out in certainly one of my sessions and other sessions, we'll be talking also about the regulatory impact and the role of regulation and how that impacts the technology adoption. So that's really crucial in this, from my perspective, in terms of getting down to the residential consumer.
Yeah, and this sort of addresses the whole thing that in the past, the balance of electricity has been achieved by the generation side, the supply side going up and down. With renewable energy that is not necessarily controllable, you actually need to control the demand side. That's the focus on the consumer side. And another sort of kind of related question, I think interesting to go to, the question from Greenie Van Buren. I got that right. I apologize if I didn't. My startup company creates a product, and basically the question is, would the utility have to approve such a product? So this is really more about the sort of industry structure and how, what is the mechanism for innovators to provide part of the solution, part of the strategic solution. This is a fantastic question, especially for this discussion. Mike, do you want to touch that?
Yeah. Let me tell you, if you wanted to provide a device that someone would install in their home to manage all of their energy usage, turn on refrigerators, do whatever you want, you can do that now. The utility has no control over it. It's on the customer side of the meter. Enjoy. But the question is, where's the value? Where's the real value? One of the problems is in some states, they only have flat rates. I remember one company, one CEO got up at a meeting and said, I've got a device, and when your air conditioner goes on, your electric water heater goes off. So you minimize the total demand. But I think there are only 2 or 3 places in the whole United States where there's a demand charge, and so it would have any impact on the bill. But for utility, every utility in the country would love to have all their customers do that, because that levelizes the demand and allows them to use all of their facilities more efficiently. You're meeting all the customer needs, but you're spreading it out. There should be some kind of value or even a credit for installing something like that. It's sort of regulatory policy. I do not have a smart meter, but my thermostat is controlled by my utility over the internet. That's one of the issues that we're going to have. It's not. I do not have dynamic pricing, but they gave me a check every year to allow them to change my thermostat 5 times a year. And I said, fine. So I think there's going to be a lot. You can present the idea to a utility. I think that, as I said, the real value to consumers and to utilities comes from relating customer end-use devices all the way up, from into the distribution system, T&D lines, generation, wholesale markets, and the ability to keep supply and demand in balance, using all of these new techniques of management.
So, Eric, you're very familiar, obviously, with the structure of the industry, which is what this question really speaks to. Is how do we get innovators and innovation to help this whole process and be part of the solution?
Well, I mean, there's a growing range of business opportunities in this space because of some of the standardization work that's going on. Things like the automated data exchange standard we're working to finalize, the automated demand response standard we're looking to finalize, where information can be made available about energy usage directly from the consumer or through the utility in a standardized fashion, allows vendors to innovate in many, many different arenas. So you've got the opportunity to sell, as we traditionally have, hardware and software components directly to utilities. But as was sort of pointed out, there early, you don't need the utility to do that. Where I live in Tennessee, we have one flat rate. We don't have any demand response programs. We don't have smart meters. But I'm still able to go and purchase the necessary equipment to give me interval data, to give me the feedback I need to manage my energy use, and make it available to third-party service providers if I want to. So, the bulk of the applications here are not yet discovered. The starting point is to have the information available, portals into the consumer's home, so that not just the utility can provide those services, but so that we have an architecture and infrastructure that anyone can. And it doesn't. A couple things that you don't have to have a smart meter to in order to understand your energy use. You don't need a smart meter or a utility program to participate in demand response in many areas. So a lot of things that people think are tightly coupled really already are less so. And part of that's education of the consumer that we know that we've been doing a really bad job at in our industry, and we've got to work to fix that.
So continuing on that, there's another question from Ashu Digni, and it's really about the internet, and obviously innovation and internet kind of almost go hand in hand. The use of internet is imperative. It's kind of obvious, and I think Mike deals with that in one of the areas, and it talks about the security aspects.
Yeah. Let me broach that, because I think we need to make an important point. The smart grid is more than smart meters. And for utility infrastructure and communication, we have different parts of our business. Parts of our business that we would never, ever put on the internet. We just don't trust it. It doesn't have the speed that we need for managing mission-critical T&D relationships and keeping the network in balance and ensuring the reliability. If you want to go down to the other end of the spectrum where we're reading meters or maybe even doing some demand response, if we read your meter a day late, who cares? And maybe the internet's great for that. So you really have to, when you talk about all this infrastructure mix and what utilities need, you just can't talk broadly. You really have to look at the specific application you're talking about, and then consider whether or not the internet would be good for that part of it. And I think your point on the next part of the question, the data security, how will it be ensured? That's a critical issue, and that's why I think for some parts of the utility business we would never use the cloud or the internet because we'll do our own networks, like fiber optics, whatever. But for other parts of it, there are a lot of business and banking transactions and other things that go over the internet, and for parts of our business, it's probably fine.
Dean, do you want to?
Yeah, Ashu, I think that's a great question, and hopefully I pronounced your name correctly. But cybersecurity is of the utmost importance in smart grid, and it's certainly always a major topic in all of our standards and technology discussions. At the Smart Grid Interoperability Panel, we have a cybersecurity working group which consists of, I think the count is now over 550 of the top cybersecurity experts, not just in North America, but I would say in the world. And so we continue to address this. At NIST, we produced a publication on cybersecurity for the smart grid as well. So we continue to look at this, and it is and will always be, a point of focus.
Just looking at some of the other questions. Judith Schwartz put up another question. If you can put that up, Mike. Would it be possible to bring in world-renowned experts on user interface? Again, that pushes the discussion obviously into the consumer side issues in terms of how consumers interface with the grid and with the power system. And this is kind of, I would argue, is kind of the soft side of things. It's not really about the technology. And maybe from a technology adoption, that's something that we need to include in GridWeek. What's the feeling of the group?
Yeah, I think it's critical. You've got if you look at the consumer side, right, it's not like a lot of people here in this room that are very highly technology savvy. And in fact, before we got on the call, I was talking about my mother, soon to be 93 years old, wanting to get a computer. And I just said, I kind of threw up my hands to myself when I was on the phone, and I said, this ain't going to happen. But you are right. I take a look. We were also talking about the iPad and how easy it is to use. So I think this is an excellent suggestion. And
I always thought that what the utilities should have done, if they really wanted to get the smart meters out there, is to change the name to iMeters, sell them at the Apple store, and before even people knew what they were, they'd be lining up around the block. Apple understands how to do a device with great user interface, and the adoption. For all of us sitting here, and I'm sure out listening, we all understand the tremendous value that smart meters and smart grid will provide. But we've been, hearing it costs too much, or my bill is triple, I'm going to get cancer, all these anti-smart meters and therefore smart grid. And, maybe that's a problem that we really haven't done a good job of explaining it to consumers.
This is a really good point. This is a really good point. A number of utilities are embracing that. I know Southern California Edison spent a significant amount of time with a very well-known user interface design firm, to address this in some of their early work. And last month, and you can find this on LinkedIn if you want, but last month SCE posted a job opening for what they call a user experience design lead, and to provide the strategic vision and thought leadership in the areas of user experience, interaction design, information architecture, usability, and accessibility. So some folks get it, and hopefully we'll see more of that.
And thanks for that suggestion. I think that will feed into some speakers and some content within GridWeek. I'm pretty sure about that. A question from Phil Balthazar. Does this group see the utility as the most suitable manager of its customer bill information? Or, basically the question is asking, is it a utility or is it potentially some third-party manager or potential manager of customers' information?
Let me take that. It looks like it's almost two different questions. Does this group see the utility as the most suitable manager of a customer's bill? If you're talking about creating the bill and charging customers, absolutely yes. I mean, we're the ones who are providing the distribution service and reading the meters and calculating it according to the tariff that has been approved by a state commission. There were, I guess, during the restructuring debates of the 90s, there were third-party people that wanted to do that function, and in most cases, some of the independents, the billing really was a major stumbling block. Utilities actually are extremely good at managing the millions of customers and analyzing their bills. Then you say, is there going to be a business case for third-party management aggregator to represent pools of customers to deliver DR needs to utility according to real-time needs? Yes. I'm seeing that in two respects. I'm seeing third-party aggregators aggregating demand response and selling it up to wholesale markets and making a business. But my concern with that model is it's a single revenue stream. It's a wholesale market play. And when you've got I've seen the other avenue where there's basically an aggregator working under the umbrella of the utility. First of all, if you're working under the umbrella of the utility, then you have all the utility customers, and it's not one-off of who you can sign up. Number two, when the wholesale markets are flat and you've got a system disturbance, you can again press that button and have value, other revenue streams that aren't available to third parties. The ability of utilities to control demand and avoid substation upgrades. The abilities of utilities to turn off water heaters when a cloud comes by and solar panels go dark. The ability to cycle high current EV chargers off the same transformer pole. I mean, these are values that only really the utility can monetize. And so I've seen third-party aggregators both under the tent of the utility and outside. They're two different models. They both have value, but I think really to maximize the value of the investments that we're all going to be making, that having someone who has access to the value stream all the way up to the turbine, turbine G, T, D, and the customer side will eventually be the right model.
I'll challenge Mike a little bit on that one. I think there are more opportunities for this, and I would agree with Mike on the under the utility umbrella. Utilities have been outsourcing meter reading services, bill production services, even demand response services for quite some time, but doing so with the control of that provider. Because from a meter reading point of view, that is the cash register, that is the lifeblood from a business point of view. and that has to be managed very carefully. But it can be done with third-party providers. So that means that there are business opportunities for people to provide good, low-cost, effective services there as all of industry moves to use outsourcing where appropriate.
I'll agree with that, Eric.
So we're probably coming up to maybe the last question, and then we can have some closing comments. Laura Feinstein put in a question, kind of maybe a little bit controversial. Don't understand the tremendous value and the tremendous focus on smart meters. We already had some discussions about that. Smart grid, smart meters are not the same thing. And customers are not clamoring for it, which is, I think, the analysis of that. Customers don't really know what the value is, so that's one of. So the question is, what is the tremendous value? I mean, to me, my understanding of that is it's needed because it's part of the infrastructure that's needed for smart grid to work. So I don't know whether Mike or Eric.
Yeah, you know, the tremendous value. You know, the Ahmed Faruqi from the Brattle Group did an analysis of Baltimore Gas and Electric's smart grid network, and they found that basically for a $500 million rollout over 5 years, that they were looking at $2.6 billion in benefits over 20 years, and that's assuming, you know, that customers will respond. You know, in their studies, they're seeing 30–40% response on the key days. Having customers move offline for the 5 days a year for noon to 6 p.m., maybe 30 to 50 hours a year, allows the utility to avoid $5 to $10 billion power plants. What they found is that on those days that BG&E could save over $660 million in avoided PGM wholesale market prices. They saw benefits of so I mean these are things that customers don't see sometimes in their normal bill. This is over the next 20 years. These are things that won't be in their bills.
Yeah, I totally. Yeah, you're right on, Mike. And this is not new. I mean, I've been working on programs and looking at this for like almost all my career. What's new is the technology is there to make it much easier for the consumer to directly participate. So it's not so much about the value of smart meters. There's simply high value in the situational awareness that communicative metering provides. Whether you put a label on and call it a smart meter doesn't matter. But that situational awareness, the ability to control your own destiny and manage it, and more importantly, buy new devices that manage it for you without you having to think about it, that's where there's just no question. There should be no question if you even take the cursory look at it to find all those value streams you talk about.
Yeah, the problem, though, is, again, we're trying to sell consumers on future reductions or flattening of the prices, and that's a tough thing to sell for my.
Well, you don't have to sell the future.
I will.
You don't have to sell the future. I mean, within 1 month of installing some relatively cheap devices to provide my family, that information and feedback, we cut our own energy costs back by 30-some%. That's immediate value. The payback on that investment was like 3 months. I
would beg to differ on the average consumer perhaps a little bit, but I would like to close this topic out on saying I think the big driver here in the future will be EVs again.
Yeah, and let me say also, some of the things that there are a lot of, one comment you can't see, that someone said you can do a lot of this without smart meters, and you can. But, smart meters have been rolled out in rural areas where you've got 5 customers per line mile, and the cost savings of not having meter readers drive all the way through rural America is a huge value that the smart meters provide, that kind of meter reading. And we can also keep better track on the quality, know when customers are out with automatic notification of outages.
That doesn't require a smart meter.
So this is what we love, to have a conversation that gets heated, and we've got 30 seconds left, and we have to bring this to a close. So thank you again for all of the great questions that's come in. And I think a few of them have stirred up some new thinking in the group here that will be fed into the development process. And want to bring this to a close. Remind you that we will have one more webinar, and since these are going so well, maybe we have more than one more. But there's one more scheduled anyway on the August the 4th on the state of deployment. That will be also very interesting, and remind everybody that GridWeek is in Washington D.C. September 12th to 15th, and hope to see you all there. Thank you to our panelists, Eric Gunter, Dean Prohaska, and Mike Solak, and from Washington D.C. I bid you farewell. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.